October 1968. A cold morning in Dearborn, Michigan. Frost clings to the grass outside the engineering buildings. Steam rises from coffee cups clutched in gloved hands. The sound of engines echoing off concrete walls. Not the lazy rumble of production cars being tested, something sharper, higher, more urgent. Ford was scared and angry. Chevrolet had the Z28, a small block screamer purpose-built for road racing. It was winning races. It was winning press. It was winning the hearts of young buyers who cared about lap times more than quarter-mile slips. Chrysler had brute force big blocks that dominated drag strips and made headlines every weekend. The Hemi was legendary. The 440 was everywhere. And on racetracks across America, Ford was losing something far more important than trophies: relevance. The blue oval was becoming invisible in the one arena that mattered most to a generation of buyers who read Road and Track and dreamed of heel-toe downshifts instead of tire smoke. Most people think the Boss 302 was just another muscle car engine, a cool badge on a Mustang fender, a loud exhaust note, a footnote from the late 60s that shows up at car shows and gets polite nods from people who don't really understand what they're looking at. But that's not the real story. What almost nobody knows is that this engine was designed to bend racing rules, humiliate rivals, and drag Ford back to the top of professional road racing through sheer engineering audacity. And if a few things had gone differently, the Boss 302 might have changed the entire future of American performance cars. You think you know this story? Not like this. In the late 1960s, the muscle car wars were already raging on the streets. Big blocks were getting bigger. Cubic inches were climbing toward absurd numbers. Every stoplight was a potential drag race. Every cruise night was a horsepower measuring contest. But the real battle wasn't happening at stoplights. It was happening on road courses, high-speed corners that punished heavy cars, long straights that rewarded aerodynamics, brutal endurance races where engines had to survive hour after hour at full throttle, braking zones that destroyed cheap pads and warped rotors. And the battleground had a name: Trans Am. The SCCA Trans-American Sedan Championship was the proving ground. It attracted factory teams, professional drivers, and media attention that made it impossible to ignore. Winning Trans Am meant proving your car could actually handle, not just go fast in a straight line, actually turn corners. The rules limited engines to 5 liters. That's 305 cubic inches. Chevrolet saw the rule and built the Z28 around it like a tailored suit. A 302 cubic inch small block using a 327 block with a 283 crankshaft. Clever combination. It could rev hard all the way to 7,000 RPM without self-destructing. It cornered flat thanks to suspension tuned for the track, and it could survive race after race without grenading bearings or throwing rods. The Z28 was winning, consistently. Ford had nothing that could touch it. The standard 302 Windsor was reliable, sure. It was a good engine. It started in the cold. It ran for 100,000 miles without complaint. It powered taxis and delivery trucks and family sedans. But it was built for torque and daily driving, not for sustained 7,000 RPM laps around Laguna Seca. The heads were designed for low-end grunt, not high RPM airflow. The camshaft was mild. The valvetrain couldn't handle sustained abuse. Put a Windsor 302 on a road course at racing speeds, and it would either blow up or get walked by every Z28 on the grid. Meanwhile, Ford's FE big blocks were too large to qualify. The legendary 427 side oiler, the engine that won Le Mans, illegal. Too many cubic inches, so Ford did something radical, something very Ford. They decided to cheat, legally. The plan came from the top. Bunky Knudsen, freshly hired away from General Motors in one of the most stunning executive moves of the decade, walked into Ford's Dearborn headquarters and made one thing clear to everyone who would listen. We're going racing, and we're going to win. Knudsen knew what winning looked like. He'd seen it at Pontiac, he'd seen it at Chevrolet. He knew the formula: build something special, race it, win. Watch the showroom traffic increase. To beat the Z28, Ford needed a brand new engine, but they didn't have time to design one from scratch. Development cycles normally took years. They needed something now. The 1969 season was coming fast, so they stitched one together. The block came from the 302 Windsor. It was the right size. It was already in production. The tooling existed. The 4-inch bore was exactly what they needed to stay within the displacement limit. But the heads? Those came from the 351 Cleveland. The Cleveland engine was still in development, not yet released to the public, but the cylinder heads were ready, and they were special. Big ports designed for high RPM breathing. Massive valves that could flow air like nothing else in Ford's lineup. Canted valve geometry that improved flow angles. These were race-bred heads wearing a thin disguise of production car legitimacy. It was a Frankenstein engine, a parts bin special assembled from pieces that were never designed to work together. And that's exactly why it worked. With a 4.0-inch bore and a 3.0-inch stroke, displacement landed at 302 cubic inches on the nose, right at the rulebook limit. Not a cubic inch to spare, not a cubic inch wasted. Compression was set at 10.5.1 for the street version, high enough to make serious power, high enough to require premium fuel, but still manageable for daily driving if the owner knew what they were doing. Inside, Ford used forged steel crankshafts that could handle stresses the Windsor was never designed to see. Heavy-duty connecting rods with stronger bolts, 4-bolt main bearing caps on the center 3 journals, and solid lifters instead of hydraulic units. No hydraulics. This engine was meant to rev use. Hydraulic lifters can't keep up at high RPM. They pump up, they float, they lose control of the valves. Solid lifters require periodic adjustment, but they stay in contact with the cam lobes no matter how fast the engine spins. The camshaft was aggressive, really aggressive. Duration numbers that would make a stock Windsor stumble and cough. Lift figures that pushed the valves deep into the combustion chambers. Overlap that sacrificed low-end torque for top-end breathing. Peak power didn't arrive until around 6,200 RPM. Below that, the engine felt almost lazy, like it was waiting for something. Redline was officially listed at 6,500 RPM. That's what Ford printed in the owner's manual. That's what they told customers. In reality, race engines screamed past 7,500 RPM. Some were seen hitting 8,000 on track with race-prepped valve trains and dry sump oiling systems. For a pushrod V8 in 1969, these were numbers from another planet. And that Cleveland-style cylinder head? It changed everything. Huge 2.23-inch intake valves, the biggest Ford had ever put in a small block. For comparison, the standard Windsor 302 used 1.78-inch intake valves. Exhaust valves measured 1.71 inches. Again, massive for the displacement. Airflow numbers that embarrassed most big blocks. The heads could move air so efficiently that the small 302 could breathe like an engine with an extra 100 cubic inches. On paper, the Street Boss 302 was rated at 290 horsepower at 5,800 RPM. Everyone knew that number was a lie. A deliberate understatement designed to keep insurance companies calm and regulators uninterested. Every manufacturer was doing it. The game was to hide horsepower in plain sight. On dynos, bone stock engines pulled from showroom cars were making well over 320 horsepower, some tested even higher. The variation was significant because these were essentially hand-built engines with quality levels that varied from assembly day to assembly day. Race trim? With headers and proper tuning and race fuel, closer to 450 horsepower from 302 cubic inches. That specific output that wouldn't become common in American V8s for another 40 years. That's when the fear started spreading. Across the industry, engineers at Chevrolet and Chrysler began hearing rumors. A new Ford small block. Something different, something serious. But there was a problem. Actually, there were a lot of problems. The Boss 302 wasn't easy to live with. It wasn't a civilized engine that purred at idle and pulled smoothly from a stop. It was a race engine that happened to have license plates. Idle quality was rough. The aggressive cam meant the engine loped and stumbled at low RPM. At stoplights, the whole car shook. The engine threatened to stall if you weren't careful with the throttle. Low-end torque was weak. The cam timing that helped the engine breathe at high RPM killed bottom-end grunt. Off the line, the Boss 302 felt almost lazy. You had to rev it past 3,500 RPM before it really woke up, and then it came alive all at once. Owners complained, dealers complained. Service departments weren't used to engines like this. Customers would bring cars in complaining that something was wrong because the idle was so rough. Mechanics would shrug and explain that this was normal. This was how the engine was supposed to run. And racers? They broke things. Valve springs failed under sustained high RPM operation. The aggressive cam put enormous stress on the valvetrain, and springs that were barely adequate for street use would weaken and break during race conditions. Timing chains stretched. The high loads and sustained RPM accelerated wear. Race teams learned to replace chains frequently or risk catastrophic valve timing issues mid-race. Oil control became critical at high RPM. The engine needed to be filled with exactly the right oil to exactly the right level. Too much oil would cause windage losses and foaming. Too little would starve the bearings. Heat was a constant battle. The aggressive tune meant the engine ran hot. Cooling systems needed to be perfect, or temperatures would climb into dangerous territory. One Ford mechanic reportedly said, "This thing doesn't warm up. It just wakes up angry." And yet, when it worked, it was unstoppable. By 1969, Ford rolled out the Boss 302 Mustang to the public. Subtle, purposeful, menacing in an understated way. No flashy, non-functional scoops bolted onto the hood. The Boss 302 got a flat black hood treatment with simple twist-lock pins. Functional, no oversized stripes screaming for attention. The graphics were restrained. A simple Boss 302 call-out on the fenders. That was enough. Front and rear spoilers added downforce without looking ridiculous. They worked. This car wasn't built for drag racing. It was built to hunt Z28s. Suspension geometry was revised for better handling. Springs and shocks were tuned for road course work. Steering was quicker. Brakes were larger. Everything that could be improved for track use was improved. On track, the difference was immediate. The Boss 302 could rev higher than anything Chevy brought to the grid. It could brake later, diving into corners with confidence. Exit corners harder, putting power down earlier thanks to improved rear suspension geometry. And most importantly, it could survive. Race after race, hour after hour. The engine held together. At the 1969 Trans Am season opener, the tone shifted. Ford was suddenly competitive. Not dominant yet, but competitive. The Mustangs were running with the Camaros instead of watching them disappear into the distance. By 1970, everything came together. The cars were lighter. Engineers had found weight to remove without sacrificing strength. Suspension was dialed in perfectly. Spring rates, damper settings, alignment geometry, everything optimized through 2 seasons of racing experience. And the engine finally matured. With improved oiling systems that kept pressure consistent through high G corners, the bottom end became bulletproof. Better valve train control through revised rocker geometry and improved valve spring technology meant the top end could handle sustained abuse. Race-prepped internals gave teams confidence to push harder than ever before. The Boss 302 became reliable at insane RPM. Mark Donohue drove one of these machines for Penske Racing. He was already a legend, known for technical brilliance and precise driving. In his hands, the Boss 302 was surgical. Parnelli Jones drove for Budmore Engineering. Aggressive, experienced, fearless. He pushed the cars to their absolute limits, and the cars pushed back with wins. At tracks like Laguna Seca with its famous corkscrew, Road Atlanta with its blind crests and high-speed sweepers, Watkins Glen with its brutal long straights. The Boss 302 wasn't just winning, it was embarrassing the competition. Gap after gap, lap after lap. In the 1970 Trans Am Championship, Ford dominated. 5 wins out of 11 races. That might not sound overwhelming until you realize how competitive the series was, how hard Chevrolet and AMC were pushing, how much money was being spent. The championship title, Ford's name at the top. Chevy defeated. The Boss 302 had done exactly what it was built to do. It had bent the rules. It had combined parts in ways nobody expected. And it had beaten the best that GM could build. But here's the twist most people miss. At the exact moment, the Boss 302 proved its potential. At the precise instant, it demonstrated what a high-revving, small-displacement American V8 could accomplish. The world changed. Insurance companies panicked. They had been tracking the rising accident rates among young muscle car buyers. They had been counting the claims from street racing incidents and single-car crashes. And they decided the party was over. Premiums exploded. A 21-year-old buyer looking at a Boss 302 might face insurance costs higher than the car payment. Some drivers were simply refused coverage at any price. The muscle car suddenly became unaffordable for the exact demographic that wanted it most. The Clean Air Act loomed. Federal regulators were coming for horsepower. Emission standards were about to tighten dramatically. High-compression engines running on leaded fuel were suddenly political targets. Every manufacturer knew changes were coming, and nobody knew how bad it would get. And muscle cars became villains overnight. Newspapers ran stories about street racing deaths. Politicians gave speeches about irresponsible automakers selling dangerous machines to young drivers. The entire performance car segment went from aspirational to controversial in what felt like moments. Ford looked at the Boss 302 and saw a problem: expensive to build. The special heads and solid lifter valve train and heavy-duty internals cost more than standard small block parts. Margins were thin, hard to certify. Those aggressive cam timings and high compression ratios would never meet coming emissions standards without major changes. Harder to sell to regular buyers. Most customers didn't want an engine that needed 4,000 RPM to come alive. They wanted something docile and torquey for everyday driving. Only about 7,000 Boss 302 Mustangs were built in 1969, roughly 6,300 in 1970. Compared to tens of thousands of standard Mustangs, these were niche products. And then it was over, just like that. No Boss 302 in 1971. No follow-up. No evolution, no next-generation version with fuel injection or revised heads. The tooling disappeared. The race program shut down. Ford walked away from one of the most advanced small-block engines of its era. Just walked away. And here's the haunting question. What if they hadn't? The Boss 302 proved something dangerous. That small displacement engines could beat big blocks on the track. That RPM and breathing mattered more than cubic inches. That handling and balance could outperform brute force. That weight was the enemy of speed. Sound familiar? That philosophy would dominate racing decades later. Japanese manufacturers would build empires on it. European sports car makers already understood it. But in 1970, America? It was too early. The market wanted torque. The market wanted noise. The market wanted straight-line speed that could be measured in quarter-mile times and trap speeds. The Boss 302 was a road racer trapped in a drag racing world. Nobody wanted to hear that 302 cubic inches was enough if you built it right. Today, its legacy has only grown. Original Boss 302 Mustangs now sell for 6 figures at major auctions. Good examples with documentation and matching numbers command prices that would have seemed insane in the 1980s when these cars were worth pocket change. The engines are collector royalty. A complete, numbers-matching Boss 302 engine can sell for more than an entire standard Mustang from the same era. And when Ford revived the Boss 302 name in 2012, they weren't just borrowing a cool name for marketing purposes, they were honoring an idea: high revving. The 2012 Boss 302 featured a 444 horsepower 5.0-liter V8 with a screaming 7,500 RPM redline, naturally aspirated, no turbochargers, no superchargers, just displacement and airflow and engineering. Track-focused, suspension tuned for road courses, aerodynamics optimized for downforce, limited sound deadening to save weight. Exactly what the original stood for. The irony? The modern performance world finally caught up to it, 42 years later. So yeah, the Boss 302 won races. It beat Chevy, it earned a championship. It proved that Ford could build something that revved and handled and survived. But what makes it legendary is what it almost became. The engine that nearly rewrote American performance philosophy. The engine that proved RPM could matter more than size. And the engine Ford walked away from just as it was changing everything. If you enjoyed this deep dive, let me know in the comments what story you want next. Another engine war, another forgotten race car, or another moment when everything almost went a different way. And make sure to subscribe, because the next story is even crazier.